Good afternoon and welcome to Crisis and Hope, YU Voices. Crisis and Hope is a project of the Yeshiva University Center for Israel Studies, the Rabbi Arthur Schneier Program for International Affairs, and Judaic Studies at YU, Mada'ai HaYahadut. My name is Jess Olson, and I'm a professor of Jewish history here at Yeshiva University. Today, we're privileged to host a very special conversation between former United States Ambassador to Israel, Daniel Shapiro, and our own Mashgiach Ruchani, Rabbi Yosef Blau. Ambassador Shapiro is Distinguished Visiting Fellow at Tel Aviv University's Institute of National Security Studies since March of 2017. He was appointed by President Obama to be United States Ambassador to Israel from 2011 to the end of the Obama administration, and was noted for his management of the US-Israel relationship during the Palestinian peace negotiations, the Iran nuclear agreement, regional instability, and periods of significant bilateral tension and disagreement. Among his major contributions were negotiating the $38 billion Memorandum of Understanding for US military aid to Israel, unprecedented in public outreach in fluent Hebrew to Israel's diverse communities, and 40% growth in US-Israeli trade. He previously served as Senior Director for the Middle East and North Africa on the National Security Council, in which he served as a member of Special Envoy George Mitchell's team, led US diplomatic efforts in Syria and Lebanon, and advised President Obama through the upheavals in Arab states in 2011. He previously served in numerous senior advisory positions in the US Congress, including with Senator Bill Nelson of Florida, Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, and the House Foreign Relations.
Everybody's registered. Get in. I know.
He holds degrees from Brandeis University and Harvard University.
Yeah.
Rabbi Blau is Mashgiach Ruchani, spiritual guidance counselor at Rabbi Yitzhak Elkanan Theological Seminary since 1977. He is also the spiritual guidance counselor for students at the university's undergraduate schools and colleges for men. Outside Yeshiva, Rabbi Blau was president of the Religious Zionists of America from 2004 to 2016. He has served both as national president of Yavna, the National Religious Jewish Students Association, and as a member of its National Advisory Board. He has also served as vice president of the National Conference of Yeshiva Principals. For the past 3 decades, he's been an advocate for victims of sexual abuse, particularly in the Orthodox Jewish community. With that, let's get started. For our audience, thank you all for joining us today, and we welcome your questions. But if you would please submit them via the chat function, we will collate them and ask for them at the end of our remarks. With that, we turn to Rabbi Blau.
Thank you, Professor Olson. I'd like to start by noticing something that's not on the Ambassador Shapiro's bio, but I think is particularly relevant to the Yeshiva community and our students. It is very common for our students to spend a year or more studying in Israel. It was not very common when Ambassador Shapiro was a college student to do so, and he spent his sophomore year studying in Israel. Perhaps he can describe what that year was like and how it influenced the choices that he made that led to his becoming ambassador.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Blau. Thank you, Professor Olson, and all the organizers. And it's just an honor and pleasure to be with the Yeshiva University community. I have great respect for Yeshiva University, and thank you for this opportunity. Yeah, it was a little unusual. It actually was the second unusual thing I did with respect to Israel, because I also took a gap year before college and spent time in Israel. Again, much more common today than was then. I had only been in Israel once previous to that. My family and I were living in Israel when my parents were on a sabbatical in the fall of 1973. So we had this incredible, terrible, difficult, and also in some ways inspiring experience of living in Israel during the Yom Kippur War. I was 4 years old, so that was not anything that I could participate in other than as a small child, but it really bonded our family with Israel in ways I don't think a normal stay in Israel might have. And I always knew I wanted to return. So I chose to take a gap year after college, worked a bit at home to save up the money for it, and then joined a terrific program sponsored by the Reform Movement that involved living with an Israeli family, a Moroccan Jewish family in Jerusalem that spoke no English, and really had to polish my Hebrew, studied Torah, studied Israel Zionist history, traveled the country, of course, got my Hebrew in decent shape. And then by the time I went home to start college at Washington University in St. Louis, I already knew I didn't want to wait for my junior year to go back. And I came up with a really good excuse, which was I started dating a woman that summer at a summer camp we were both counselors at, who was a year ahead of me at Brandeis University, and she was going to go for her junior year abroad. And so I convinced my parents that I wanted to go back for my sophomore year at Hebrew University. In that year, I really delved deep into Middle East history, Middle East politics, Hebrew and Arabic, Judaism, Jewish history, and Islamic history. And I can draw a pretty straight line from those academic studies to what I ended up specializing in Middle East politics in graduate school, and decisions to try my hand in government service after graduate school. The one hiccup was that having had this successful time with a girlfriend at the time, after a year at WashU and a year at Hebrew University, I decided I wanted to transfer to Brandeis to be where she is. And I had a good line for the admissions committee, because I was a Jewish studies major, or Jewish and Near Eastern studies major. Brandeis is a pretty good place to study those things. Didn't tell them about the girlfriend, but I think it's okay. We can let the cat out of the bag now. She's my wife of 29 years. We have 3 delightful daughters. So I think it worked out for everybody.
Okay, let's move to your professional life. Could you describe for us what the role of the ambassador is, and how you handled all the complicated situations that took place in those 5 years, including the, let's say, difficult relationship between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Sure. Well, there's a lot in that question, and I'll try to give the brief answer. Maybe we can go into some of the elements in more detail. Look, a U.S. ambassador, any ambassador for their country, has one primary responsibility, and that is to promote and protect and advance the interests of their country. It's a incredible honor, incredible responsibility, as any of us who are American citizens, I think, would feel, to stand before the American flag on behalf of the President of the United States, the Secretary of State, the American government, and the American people, and articulate what's important for the United States interests. But it is a special pleasure and uniquely fulfilling opportunity to do that, hosted by a close ally, a close partner. And in my case, I can say a country with which I have, as we were just discussing, deep personal connections and affinities and ties. And so I came knowing that President Obama, who, of course, we're not going to pretend there weren't controversies surrounding some of his approaches, but he chose me to advance what he wanted to have happen in this relationship, which was to strengthen it, which was to ensure that Israel's security was absolutely sacrosanct, and that the United States would do whatever was necessary to ensure Israel's security and its ability to defend itself, and the qualitative military edge it needed, and the freedom of action needed to do that, knowing that the U.S. was the ultimate backstop and provider of assistance for that. He wanted to strengthen the relationship as a security partnership, because the U.S. isn't just a provider in that relationship, it's a beneficiary. The intelligence we draw from our cooperation with Israel, the military training we do together, the technologies that Israel develops, which serve our interests as well, and in our military as well as Israel's, have been deeply beneficial to the United States. He wanted to advance all that. He wanted to deepen the partnership between the moral bond between the peoples of two democracies who share so many common values, and the fundamental principles of democracy, of freedom of speech and association and religion, and the ability for every citizen to contribute and and live out their dreams. He believed very firmly that there's a unique mission for Israel as a Jewish state in the historic homeland of the Jewish people. And there's a moral responsibility of the United States to support that and ensure that is never called into question, and the legitimacy of Israel is always upheld anywhere it's challenged. And he believes strongly that Israel will be stronger and safer, and its Jewish and democratic character will be preserved when it's at peace with all of its neighbors, including the Palestinians, in a two-state solution freely negotiated between the parties. So he asked me to advance all of those interests. There are many others, of course. There's an incredible economic and technology partnership between the United States. Startup nation, Israel's technology ecosystem has essentially become a part and parcel and almost a sibling relationship with the American high-tech sector, and so much intelligence, so much technology and innovation flows in both directions. He wanted to deepen that. He saw that in his style of politics that he conducted everywhere in the world, we are better as diplomats, we are better as government officials, we are better as leaders if we're talking not only to other officials, but we're talking to citizens. And so I was tasked, but I also welcomed the responsibility to travel the country and meet with every possible sector of Israeli society, from ultra-Orthodox to modern Orthodox, religious Zionists to secular, to Moroccan and Ashkenazi and Ethiopian and Russian and Arab and Bedouin and Muslim and Christian. And it was a huge pleasure to travel the width and breadth of Israel, getting to know those communities, looking for ways to draw them into the U.S.-Israel partnership, find their own pathway through exchanges, through English study, through business partnerships, technology partnerships, but also help them understand what the United States saw as the principles and the policies that would animate the relationship. So there's no end to what an ambassador has to deal with, especially in a relationship as rich and diverse and multifaceted as this one. And every day was different. We had weeks when we had multiple U.S. cabinet secretaries visiting, and I would shepherd them around. We had hundreds of members of Congress come to visit, and I would do that. We had hard-nosed negotiations over the Iran nuclear deal, over the Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement, later over a $38 billion memorandum of understanding for U.S. defense assistance to Israel. We helped support the Iron Dome and other missile defense programs. I was involved in all of those things. And of course, that included the fact that at times there were very public disagreements between our governments, between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu. My job, of course, was to explain our policy and make sure it was understood, but it was also my job to be a channel through which the Israeli government and the Israeli people to some extent could communicate their views back to Washington. And I tried very hard to conduct both of those faithfully. I think I had the trust of the Prime Minister, even when we had disagreements. And I know I had the trust of the President. And, sometimes an ambassador gets caught in some of those tricky situations, but I always try to remind people, and I'm very pleased that the current and new Israeli ambassador in Washington, Gilad Erdan, has said something I said a lot very recently in an interview. He said, even the best friends, we have so much in common, we have so many common interests, we have so many common values, we're going to do an enormous amount of good together. But even the best friends, even the closest members of the same family have disagreements from time to time, and that's okay. Different countries certainly are not going to always have absolutely identical interests, but not every disagreement is a crisis, and not every disagreement needs to be a crisis. And when we hit that point, it's our job as diplomats to help narrow the areas of disagreement, acknowledge what we will have to agree to disagree on, but then reinforce and recommit to what is common between us, which is deep and abiding and enduring.
Thank you very much. I won't ask two-part questions anymore. I'll make it a little bit easier to answer the question. You mentioned before, and it is really as far as I can recall, unique that you stayed in Israel. You didn't go back to the United States, and we're still speaking while you're in Israel. Uh, could you explain that choice and the role that you play in the Israel National Institute for Strategic Studies, which I don't know how many non-Israelis besides you are part of it?
Right. So January 2017, I served until the last day of the Obama administration. I must say I was among those who was a little shocked by the outcome of the 2016 election. So it happened a bit more abruptly than I thought it might. Nevertheless, an ambassador always changes, offers their resignation to the new administration. So January 20th was my last day, and it was the middle of the school year. We have 3 daughters, as I mentioned, and they wanted to. We thought it would be less disruptive if they could finish the school year. So we took a short vacation and then came back and settled in for what was supposed to be 6 months. And the oldest of those 3 was then in 11th grade. And she said, "Look, I don't really want to go back for only 1 year of high school. How about we stay 1 more year?" That seemed like a pretty good idea. We enjoy living in Israel as a private citizen family. It's very different from the life of an ambassador, with the bubble you live in, the security, the nice house, the doors that are open. But as I had that experience when I was 4 years old with my family, to now with my wife and daughters, to have the chance to just live as a normal family. We're in Renana. We were enjoying it so much after the first few months, we decided to extend the year so she could graduate. And then other daughters along the way decided to lobby for another year and another year. And here we are 4 years later. It's been very, very enjoyable. I've stayed very connected to Washington. I traveled in pre-corona times. I traveled there regularly, advised members of Congress, advised presidential candidates, tried to testify at Congress and speak in think tanks, and stay connected to the policy discussion there, because I still consider myself a U.S. foreign policy professional first and foremost. And the Institute of National Security Studies, which is led by General Amos Yadlin, he's about to retire from that role, but he's done it for a decade. And he was the former head of Israeli military intelligence, and we worked together when we were both in government. He thought it would be beneficial for their research on Israeli national security policy, which is their mission, to have the benefit of an American policymaker, recent American policymaker, as a visiting scholar and fellow, to do my own research, but also offer insights and commentary and the red teaming, if you will, the making sure, as any Israeli government or institution would, that they bear in mind what is the U.S. perspective on a policy matter that we work on together, whether it's Iran or Syria or Palestinians or China or technology. America's policy, because of the close relationship between us, because of the incredible support the United States provides Israel, is a factor in Israeli national security thinking. It's not a determining factor. It's certainly no veto over Israeli freedom of their own decision making, but it's a factor. And so he felt I could be a beneficial voice in their own research and their own presentations, speaking as an American, not as an Israeli. And I've tried to be faithful to that mission. And I have learned an enormous amount sitting with some of the top Israeli scholars, former diplomats, intelligence professionals, military leaders who have been at INSS. But I hope I've contributed, and I think I have, to helping the U.S. perspective, both of the outgoing administration, which I was not a member of, and of course I didn't always agree with, but also the opposition party, as it were, during those 4 years. Because one of the other things Israel benefit or has to sort of bear in mind is that politics change in the United States, administrations change, and one of the great strengths of this relationship has been its bipartisan support. So that when there is a change of administration, different party, the fundamentals of the relationship remain solid. So Israelis are always trying not to just work with the existing government, whoever's in charge in Washington, but be prepared for and maintain relations with the opposition party returning. So I try to play that role. Again, I'm sure I learned far more than I I offered, but I hope I offered something beneficial.
Okay, thank you again. Um, let's move on a bit to policies, specific policies. Uh, there are all kinds of rumors in America, which I'm not going to ask you about, but that you're going to return to some policy position within the new administration. I know that you have been at the same time that you've been involved in Israel. You also had a connection with the new Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, and a group that he set up with a partner in America. Uh, so I'm not sure to what degree, and I think you will differentiate if necessary between your personal views and what you think the policy will be of the new administration when I ask you these questions. So let's start with Iran. There's a great challenge of Iran. You know, America is the great Satan, and Israel's I guess, the smaller Satan. Uh, what can you say about what you fear and what you think the new administration policy is going to be with respect to Iran?
Sure. So I definitely was a strong and very vocal public supporter of then Vice President or then former Vice President candidate Biden during the election campaign, and I'm very pleased that he is now President Biden. I do not have a role in the administration, and no news to make on that regard. But I worked with him for the years he was Vice President, and Secretary Blinken is a long friend of many, many years. We worked together in the Clinton administration and in the Senate and the Obama-Biden administration. So he's a good friend. But everything I say is my own analysis. I speak for nobody but myself, certainly not for the administration. But here's what I understand about the Biden administration's approach on Iran. First of all, that President Biden, with all of his years of experience as senator, Senate Foreign Relations Committee chairman, vice president, and now president, has absolutely no illusions, and nobody who works for him has any illusions about the nature of the Iranian regime. That this is a regime that is hostile to the United States, hostile to our allies, especially Israel, with whom it has threatened destruction on numerous occasions, hostile to other partners in the region, full of malign intention toward them and toward other neighbors, and executing that malign intention through sponsoring terrorist groups like Hezbollah and Hamas and arming proxies in the Yemen and Iraq and in Syria. Some of them shoot at Israel, some of them shoot at American soldiers, some of them shoot at ships of Arab Gulf states or their oil facilities. This is a very, very challenging regime, and a regime that has definitely shown interest and capability to advance toward achieving a nuclear weapon, and that it is absolutely far too dangerous to ever imagine a regime like that possessing a destructive technology like that of a nuclear weapon. And that is something that he will simply not allow to happen. Now, when he took office, there were some facts that he had to reckon with. Obviously, he was part of the administration that struck the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, and we don't need to probably rehearse all the disagreements that occasioned between the United States and Israel around that agreement, but it was in place. President Trump withdrew from it in 2018. But then, 2 more years passed. And so this was the actual situation President Biden encountered when he arrived. Number one, that under the deal, Iran had been kept at least 1 year from the ability to produce enough fissile material for a nuclear weapon by taking away their ability to enrich it and their actual raw materials to do so. But after President Trump withdrew from the deal in 2018, Iran began to violate its commitments under the agreement, enriching uranium, installing centrifuges. And today, Iran is about 3 or 4 months from that breakout capability. So we're in a much more dangerous situation. And that's a reality that all those negative and dangerous things Iran does around the region in Yemen, Iraq, Syria, against Israel, et cetera, could, within 3 or 4 month period of time, be taking place under an Iranian nuclear umbrella. And they'd be that much more dangerous if they had that extra degree of threat and in a way protection for themselves. That's number one. Number two, those very ugly and malign activities and sponsoring terrorist groups and proxies and so forth throughout the region didn't really change either while Iran was in the deal or after President Trump withdrew from the deal. So we're dealing with an Iran that is hostile and dangerous in all situations. It's not as though that situation got better when President Trump withdrew from the deal. And third was that the United States found itself very isolated in trying to deal with the nuclear question after President Trump withdrew from the agreement. And that's because the United States was a party to 6 other countries or 5 other countries, Germany, France, Britain, China, and Russia, and the European Union as the negotiators. They still support the agreement. And when the United States tried to go to the United Nations to impose additional sanctions against Iran with others, it didn't have any other support. Now, the unilateral sanctions that President Trump imposed have actually been very significant, and they have imposed real pressure on the Iranian economy. But again, hasn't really changed the Iranian approach regionally, and hasn't really taken Iran further back from the nuclear breakout that they're at, which is very dangerous. So what President Biden said during the campaign and the transition, and since he's been inaugurated, is the United States is prepared to return to the Iran nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, in the context of mutual compliance. That means that the United States would return, but Iran would have to come back into compliance with all of the restrictions that kept it firmly at 1 year distance from that breakout. So far, Iran has not shown any willingness to do that. They're demanding the United States make the first move. They're demanding that they get compensation even for the sanctions that President Trump imposed. And President Biden is actually showing a lot of patience. And he's saying that, look, we mean compliance for compliance, and Iran is going to have to show up, and they're not going to get rewards or incentives to show up until we see that they are in compliance, or certainly on a negotiated path toward compliance. So far, that hasn't happened. In fact, Iran has lashed out. They've attacked Iraqi bases with U.S. forces. They've attacked some facilities in the Gulf where their proxies from Yemen have. As to the extent where President Biden authorized a strike to retaliate against a militia in Syria that is backed by Iraq and probably was responsible for one of the strikes in Iraq, backed by Iran and was responsible for strikes in Iraq. So President Biden is showing patience. He's not looking desperate. It's up to the Iranians to decide if getting the sanctions relief that would come from returning to the deal is sufficient. That they will then return to full compliance. But here's the most important point. Returning to the JCPOA, the 2015 deal, which does have sunsets, it does expire in a 10 to 15 year timeframe from its original signing date, is not the strategic objective of the Biden administration. The strategic objective of the Biden administration is to achieve, after going back into that deal, and through diplomacy, a much longer term, much stronger, much broader agreement that will keep Iran at safe distance from a nuclear weapon for many, many more years, that will impose much tougher inspections, that will apply to other technologies like Iran's ballistic missile program, that will also deal with Iran's dangerous regional behaviors. And on that approach, for the second phase, I think there's a lot of convergence between what Israel hopes to achieve and what the United States hope to achieve, what Gulf states hope to achieve, and what European governments hope to achieve. And that creates the option of doing this in a large coalition of many like-minded states, rather than the United States with 2 or 3 countries supporting it, maybe Israel and Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but no Europeans, no Russians, no Chinese, nobody else. But with that large coalition, putting the pressures and developing the right incentives and sanctions and other tools to draw Iran into that kind of negotiation. I'm hopeful, I don't know, I'm hopeful that Israel and the United States, even if they do disagree on that first order question of returning to the 2015 deal in a context of mutual compliance, will find there's a great deal of agreement and convergence and a lot they can do together with intelligence sharing, with developing sanctions programs, with designing an approach that will draw in other countries in support to work toward that longer, stronger agreement, which is the real strategic objective of President Biden.
In a somewhat related question, the Iranian government, aside from its hostility to the United States and Israel, is a government that has a terrible record in human rights. However, it's not the only country in this area, in the Gulf, that has a really bad record. We know the problem in Saudi Arabia, for example. President Trump's administration played down this particular concern for its own purposes. President Biden is concerned about human rights. How do you see that affecting all these relationships? And it's going to come up in terms of the Abraham Accords, which I'll ask you about in a few minutes. Certainly in dealing with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey. Israel's still the only real democracy, maybe a little bit Tunisia in the whole area. How is that going to fit into this picture?
Yeah. Well, look, President Biden has been very clear that the United States is going to try to live its own values at home. That means strengthening our own democracy. And I think we've all seen in recent months, especially on January 6th of this year, that our own democracy is fragile. And there are other ways in which our democracy needs to be significantly strengthened, including making sure we deal with systemic racism and true equality of opportunity and rights to vote for all, is protected for all our citizens. So we start at home by trying to ensure that our own we are living up to our own values and making them real in how we conduct our own democracy. Then we hope to work with a strengthened camp of other democratic nations working to likewise strengthen their own institutions and deal with internal challenges, but also deal with the external challenges posed by autocratic nations like Russia and China, trying to put pressure on their countries, trying to tell the rest of the world that their model of governance, their autocratic model of governance is superior to democratic governance, and to try to recruit other countries into their camp. And third, it means making sure that those values are also expressed in the conduct of our relationships with other partners, including non-democratic partners. As you mentioned, most of our partners in the Middle East are not democratic partners. Now, a country like Iran, with its horrific, abusive human rights relationship toward its own people, is already heavily sanctioned for many of its behaviors, not only the nuclear issue, but of course terrorism support, ballistic missile violations of UN Security Council resolutions, and human rights. There are many, many sanctions on the books because of those. The Biden administration during the transition and since has been harshly critical of Iranian violations, its imprisonment of its own people, its holding of hostages, American and other foreign hostages. And I'm sure that will continue to be a heavy discourse in whatever U.S.-Iranian diplomacy develops, if any develops. It's also going to be present in other relationships. And of course, the one that's gotten so much attention in recent weeks has been the U.S.-Saudi relationship. Saudi Arabia is a partner of the United States of decades long standing, a partner in dealing with threats like Iran, a partner in supplying reliable and affordable energy, a partner in, especially in more recent years, trying to provide a more moderate voice to politics in the Muslim world, although that's not always a consistent feature of Saudi discourse and society. But also is led by a government that has also been very, very harshly, treated very harshly its own people, imprisoned women seeking the right to drive, imprisoned many other human rights activists. And there are some other problems, the conduct of a war in Yemen that's been very disregarding of civilian casualties. And then, of course, this terrible murder of a U.S. citizen, a U.S. Permanent resident, a journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, in grisly fashion in Istanbul a couple of years ago. And so President Biden said, look, this relationship with Saudi Arabia remains important, and we will still work to defend their security. and work together on those things we have in common, but we will recalibrate this relationship to bear in mind that those values also need to be expressed. And they were in the sanctions that were imposed because of the Jamal Khashoggi murder. And this is an opportunity, I think, for countries like Saudi Arabia. There are others in the region. Let's say Egypt is another one, another U.S. partner, but with a very checkered human rights record, to understand that their ability to have the fullest and most enriching cooperation with the United States will be enhanced by improving the treatment of their own people. That is something that not only the president, but the Congress and many of the much of the American people see as an important expression of our values. It does not mean we cut off and have no relationships with or are uncaring about the security needs of these countries because they're non-democratic or even because they have these human rights abuses in their record. But it does mean that we will not ignore those aspects of their record or how they affect our relationship, how they affect the values with which we are conducting our policy and communicating to the world about what the values of a leading democratic nation like the United States.
Now, an accomplishment of the Trump administration has been the Abraham Accords. How do you think the new administration is going to try to build on it and expand it, and how does it affect the balance of power in the region?
So first of all, the Abraham Accords are terrific progress, and all credit is due to those who worked on them. And then candidate Biden recognized that during the campaign. It may have been the only Trump administration foreign policy initiative about which he spoke positively and very positively immediately and during the campaign, not worrying about the political impact of that. He recognized it's a huge opportunity. He welcomed the UAE and Bahrain's normalization with Israel as something reflective of a longstanding bipartisan goal of administrations of both parties to ensure Israel gets the rightful recognition it deserves and the treatment as a member in good standing of the region with good neighbors. But more than that, as something that serves U.S. interests. When U.S. partners collaborate with one another as partners with each other, that strengthens the United States interest. When these countries, some of which already had some quiet and under the table security cooperation, can do that openly, can have public meetings, can have intelligence exchanges and joint military exercises and technology initiatives and economic and trade and tourism and cultural exchanges, that creates a web of like-minded American partners looking out for each other's interests, working together to achieve common goals. That's obviously beneficial to the United States. It's beneficial to the United States' interest that Iran, a common adversary of the United States and all of these countries, sees that regional dynamic emerging. It creates fewer opportunities for Iran to sow divisions among those regional rivals, and it sees a stronger base that will challenge Iran, either through diplomacy and, if necessary, through other means. It may also create opportunities for the United States to position its regional security role in the Middle East more as a supporter of a collaborating group of partners rather than always having to be the overall leader of that effort. That doesn't mean the United States is going to be leaving the Middle East anytime soon, but there have been three administrations in a row, as different from Obama to Trump and Trump to Biden, who have all said they don't want to do new major Middle East military engagements, and they do want to increase focus and resources devoted to developing opportunities in the Indo-Pacific and dealing with the challenge of China. So that to the degree that Middle East countries are working together to handle their own security needs with the U.S. as a partner, but not necessarily always as the leader, that's beneficial for the United States. So there's no question that he sees the benefit, and he has said even at the time, he wants to challenge other nations to keep pace. He wants to deepen the relationships that have already been established and recruit new countries to do so. So of course, Sudan and Morocco have come along. There are other countries, Oman, Mauritania, Qatar, Kuwait, who may be candidates. And of course, Saudi Arabia, as we were talking about a moment ago, is another very significant candidate, maybe the most significant given their role in the region. What the approach of the Biden administration, I think, is still in formation. Some of the key officials who would work on this issue haven't been appointed yet, ambassadors, assistant secretary of state for the Near East and the like. But I don't think there's any question there's a strong desire to do it. The approach might be different. The UAE received a package of F-35 aircraft from the Trump administration. It's being reviewed by the Biden administration, but Morocco received recognition of the Western Sahara as Moroccan territory. I'm not sure if the Biden approach will be quite as transactional in the rewards that Arab states derive if they make the step, but there will certainly be strong encouragement, and particularly to try to drive the notion that these Arab states that have taken this step, and the UAE is the clearest example, are already strongly benefiting because of the flow of Israeli technology, of trade initiatives, of the opportunity to do partnerships and get Israeli technologies related to water and clean energy and health in a time of pandemics flowing into the Arab world and fueled in some ways now by capital that's available in these countries. There's a lot of win-win opportunities here, which the United States wants to also take part in and be a partner to. I would say that there is also an opportunity that the Biden administration sees to derive some positive momentum toward the Israeli-Palestinian issue out of the Abraham Accords. It's not instead of, and it's not a substitute for or a condition for normalization. But if Arabs and Israelis from the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco are getting together to do business deals, to study in universities, to pool their knowledge on technology and healthcare, and they invite Palestinians to participate in that as well, it breaks down the taboo about Palestinian normalization with Israel. It shows that there are benefits to Palestinians from normalization taking place. It gives those Arab states a standing with Palestinians to support them economically and through infrastructure and institutional development, but also with some positive pressures they can apply on Palestinians to change some of the approaches that they have taken that would need to change to achieve a breakthrough. And also it creates an opportunity for a different kind of dialogue with the Israeli public and government than any Arab state that boycotted Israel could ever have. Now, when the UAE and Bahrain talk, Israelis want to hear what they have to say, and they may have some influence in that conversation. So there's a lot of opportunities here for the United States, for Israel, for these Arab states, for Israelis and Palestinians together. And I think the Biden administration, as it gets fully staffed and turns to this issue, it may not be the top issue on the agenda because the pandemic is the first, the economy is the second, the climate change and China and Russia are the ones that dominate internationally. But this will get attention, and I think they see opportunities and want to seize them.
You mentioned that it may have a positive effect on the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. Ultimately, that is the key problem facing the future of Israel. It's obviously important for America as well. What do you see is the potential things that can be accomplished under the present circumstances? And I won't go into details, but we know that there has really been almost no progress, almost no, and is probably even nicer than it should be, no progress on the Israeli-Palestinian front for a number of years. What do you think the new administration can do to be helpful in a practical way in improving the situation?
Sure. Well, Secretary Blinken has spoken to this in his confirmation hearing and on a couple of other occasions since he was confirmed, to restate that the policy, the goal, the strategic objective, the guide star, if you will, of the Biden administration will remain achieving a two states for two peoples outcome to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's the only outcome, in their judgment, I agree with this, that can actually end the conflict. It's the only way Israel's status as a Jewish and democratic state can be secured for the long term. And remember our earlier discussion about how important that concept of democracy and strengthening our own democracy and the democratic institutions of our democratic allies is to the Biden outlook on things. So Israel's status as a Jewish and democratic state is deeply important. It's the only way that can be assured, and it's the only way Palestinians' legitimate rights for independence and a state of their own can be assured as well. So that will remain their goal. And it's when they use the expression a two-state solution, they mean something that looks maybe more like, even though they're not going to get into the details of a prescription, at least at this stage, what was attempted to be negotiated during the Clinton administration and the Bush administration and the Obama administration than what was presented in President Trump's plan of January 2020. That plan did use the phrase, the expression two-state solution, but it didn't really describe one. It described kind of isolated islands of very limited Palestinian autonomy surrounded by unilaterally annexed areas of the West Bank for Israel, which nearly took place and was sidelined because of the UAE normalization agreement. I think that was a good thing. And so his vision of what two states looks like isn't the Trump vision. It's something that we've seen from earlier efforts. But he also said, Secretary Blinken was very clear on this, he sees no near-term opportunities, you alluded to this, for negotiations, or certainly for successful negotiations to achieve that outcome. The same leaders are in place on both sides that have been there for well over a decade. They have had failed negotiations on multiple occasions together. They mistrust each other. They both face incredibly complex domestic political circumstances. An Israeli election, the fourth election in 2 years, is about to take place. Palestinians may have an election, and they certainly are headed for a leadership transition, whether it's through elections or other means. And so this is not the moment for the United States to come rushing in with a special envoy to convene a peace conference and negotiations on final status. They're not going to do that. Maybe they could do that later if some of those circumstances change. What they're going to focus on now is how, in a period when you can't have negotiations, do you keep a two-state solution alive and viable and achievable for the future, when a lot of the trends are flowing the other direction. Certainly attitudes have hardened. Support for and belief in a two-state solution is at probably near historic lows among both Israelis and Palestinians, although it retains plurality support over any alternative outcome. But it's much lower than it used to be. There's great suspicion. There's actions by both sides that contribute to that. The Palestinian payments to terrorists sitting in Israeli prisons, it's a reprehensible practice. It's under the Taylor Force Act. It affects the ability of the United States to provide assistance to the Palestinian Authority. President Biden supports that act and wants to see that terrible practice stop. He wants to see other forms of incitement and delegitimization stop. He also opposes Israeli settlement expansion and discussion of annexation, which are also inconsistent with that outcome of a two-state solution. So there's some pressure and suasion attempt, I think, that will be attempted on both sides not to do those things that make it harder, but also to take the positive steps that can actually improve conditions on the ground and prepare the ground for a future negotiation toward the goal of two states. Palestinian economic development and freedom of movement, which benefits Israel as Palestinian living standards will improve. Improved security coordination between the two sides. Drawing on this positive dynamic of Arab normalization and the role Arab states can play with both Israelis and Palestinians. There's actually a lot that can be done in a period without negotiations that will significantly improve conditions for both Israelis and Palestinians, and significantly improve the underlying circumstances, so that once there's leadership changes and some other new circumstances in the region, again, maybe other normalization agreements as part of this, once it's time to try to negotiate again, it's still achievable. It's still a viable outcome that two states that ends the conflict and gives both sides what they need is still achievable. This sounds very difficult. It is difficult, and it in a way sounds very modest. But I think it's a realistic assessment of what's possible now, but also what the U.S. interest is now.
I thank you very much, and I want to pass it on to Professor Olson to allow other people to ask their questions. I'm very appreciative of, first of all, your agreeing to come, and the clarity of your presentation and how forthright you've been. And now let someone else take over.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Blau, and thank you, Ambassador Shapiro. Really, just a very illuminating discussion. So I believe Ambassador Shapiro has a hard 1 o'clock exit, so we have a couple of minutes for questions. A couple have come in. Interesting. A lot of our audience are not surprisingly a little bit curious about some of your thoughts about your tenure in the Obama administration. One question that we had, an audience member was curious as to, there's an understanding, at least by this questioner, that there was some difference of opinion between you and President Obama regarding the vetoing of Resolution 2334. So the questioner was asking, why you think there was that disconnect, if that's indeed an accurate perception.
Well, I have said publicly, this wouldn't be the first time, that my recommendation at the time was that the United States veto that resolution. I didn't think it would be helpful in achieving very much so late in the administration. So I did make that recommendation. I think President Obama, made a different judgment call on a very tough issue. It was actually not something that he sought to deal with in his final weeks in office. He knew, of course, after President Trump was elected, that it wasn't going to be an issue that he could accomplish much on. And this was an issue brought to the United States at the Security Council by the Palestinians and through the friendly nations that back them. The judgment call was this: that at a time when settlements were continuing to expand, and in ways and be legalized, and in ways that he felt could undermine the ability to ever achieve a two-state solution. And a resolution was presented. It wasn't a perfectly worded resolution by any stretch of the imagination, but it wasn't maybe as bad as some. And the United States has at times supported things, not only in his administration and other, including Republican administrations, resolutions of similar quality. What would it say? Would it seem to give a U.S. imprimatur to expansion of settlements that could be very dangerous to the future of two states, to Israel's future as a Jewish and democratic state, and all the implications that carries with it? And so his judgment call was that, on balance, he would abstain, and the resolution passed. I think he could very happily have lived without this episode unfolding at all in the final weeks of his administration, but it was presented. Presidents have to make hard calls, and he made a judgment call. I would have made a different judgment call, but I think some of the characterizations of his motives had nothing to do with settling scores with Prime Minister Netanyahu or any kind of vindictiveness, and some of the descriptions of the impact of that resolution, which is actually, if one goes around the area here, one doesn't see much impact of that resolution, have been rather overstated. So even though I did make the recommendation I did, I think a lot of the descriptions and criticism of it have been more overheated than the reality.
Thank you. Very full answer. If I could just pursue a little bit further, we actually had another question that's along similar themes. I think this is obviously of great interest to the community. And I think this is an interesting question. One of the, if we could think of it, and you could correct me if I'm wrong here, one of the foundational sort of ideas behind President Obama's approach to American-Israeli relations was, as I believe he phrased it, to introduce a bit of daylight, right, between U.S. and Israeli relations. The idea that would be beneficial to both parties, to have a little bit of space, right? How do you, I guess, to phrase the question, what is your take on that? How do you feel that? First of all, is it an accurate characterization? And second of all, do you feel that I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I never understood that to be an accurate characterization. There was this description at one meeting in 2009 with some Jewish community leaders that he described his goal as being to create daylight with Israel. And that is not what he said in that meeting, for sure, but it was not my understanding of his policy. My understanding of his policy was that the United States and Israel are close allies. They're going to work together on many, many things, and that's always going to be the case. There will be things at times that we disagree on, and close friends can disagree, and it is not something that needs to be shied away from or or ignored or covered up or pretended that we could have a disagreement if that meant that there was some daylight evident because we disagree and or maybe particularly on some issue like Israeli settlements. That's not something to be pretended. It's not the case. A strong, a durable relationship can deal with those kinds of differences. So it wasn't a goal to create daylight. It was a willingness to live with that if that was the actual reality. All the same time that was happening, and again, the memory of that period is very much around the disagreements. He was driving forward with the funding for Iron Dome, a life-saving technology that has literally saved countless Israeli and Palestinian life. Other missile defense programs, the F-35 to Israel, intelligence cooperation, joint training exercises, enhancing the economic partnership. He wanted this relationship and took actions, many actions, the relationship to get it closer and strengthen it and coordinate on all of the major regional challenges. And was willing to say that, but there are things we disagree on, and as friends we can do that. So it was, and I think that's actually a fairly realistic assessment of any relationship. And the United States has those relationships with lots of countries in the world, close allies. But when a disagreement arises, it can be publicly acknowledged, and the relationship it gets along just fine.
Well, we are at the 1 o'clock hour, and so that ends our time with Ambassador Shapiro. So I hope that once the world has come back to a bit of more normalcy, if I can use that word, whatever that means, that we're able to host you in person, because this has just been a really, really wonderful opportunity, and I'm so pleased for folks who are able to attend today. And I would love to have an opportunity to have an even more in-depth discussion with you, because clearly what you bring to the table is really quite remarkable. So I want to thank.
We'll make it happen.
Excellent, excellent. So I want to thank Ambassador Shapiro. I want to thank Rabbi Blau. I also want to thank our sponsors, the Yeshiva University Center for Israel Studies, the Rabbi Arthur Schneier Program for International Affairs, and Judaic Studies at YU, Madai HaYahadut, and a special thanks to the Joseph and Faye Glatt Program on Israel and the Rule of Law. For more information about our programs, please visit our website at yu.edu/crisis and hope. That's all one word, the last one there. And for recordings of our previous events and soon this one, please see www.yu.edu/crisis and hope/past-recordings. If you got all of that. If you can't get all of that, just go to the Crisis and Hope website and it'll take you to the right place. I hope you're able to join us next week on Wednesday, March 25th for a special pre-Pesach presentation, Seeing Matzah from the Talmud to Medieval Haggadot, a conversation with our own Stephen Fine, Director of the Center for Israel Studies and Professor of Jewish History here at Yeshiva, and my friend and colleague, Ronnie Perellis, also Professor of History here at Yeshiva University, and they will be in conversation on the subject of Matzah. Hope to see you then, and thank you again for tuning in.